This video goes into why we are not already perfect if we have eternal life. Eternal life means that we as living beings has never started and will never end. So we have all the time in the world behind us, so to speak. In that case, and if we keep learning and evolving, then why have we not reached a perfection in our way of living? So if we have had this eternal time behind us, why haven't we reached that point yet? Why are we still going to war if we have had all that time behind us? So this video is about why we are not perfect in living with each other already. But firstly, we have to dig into what perfection is in the first place. I will use the idea that a perfect way of living leads to a peaceful life. So an imperfect way of living leads to an unpeaceful life. This is where we see all the wars, poverties, and general unhappiness in life. It is from this point of view clear that we do not have a perfect or happy life yet. But why not? If there's something eternal behind what we are as living beings, there is this I or this director in our life, then why are we not already in a state where we are happy, where we have a perfect life, where we have learned how to live the life? The Danish author Martinus has an explanation for this. The explanation is in two parts. He explains that we need contrasts to experience life. We cannot only experience white without black, or black without white. And we cannot just experience happiness. There has to be a contrast in our perception of life to happiness in order to experience it. So if there were no unhappiness, there wouldn't be any happiness, and vice versa. Without contrast, there is no experience. It would be sort of a whiteout or a blackout, if you like. There would be nothing, basically. There could be no change either in our experience, because there wouldn't be any contrast or variation in our life. And it would just be absolute silence, which is the opposite of what we actually experience. So we have day and night, light and day, happiness and unhappiness, and so forth. And we need these contrasts to experience life. The other principle that comes into play is the idea of hunger and satiation. When we experience something, even if it's something we really enjoy, like our favorite meal, we will eventually get tired of it. There is no hunger to experience any more of our favorite food, and we will start to long for something else. And when we experience that for a while, we get filled or tired or saturated with that as well, and we want to move on to something new. This keeps repeating over and over again. So there is this basic principle of hunger and saturation, where we'll keep going from one thing to another. The point here is that when we have experienced something for a while, we get tired on it and want to move on. And the longing for something also happens in the grand scheme of things. As of now, we are fed up with wars and exploiting each other, but we have not figured out how to overcome these things yet. So why are we in that situation where things are so brutal and there's so much unhappiness? The idea is that we eventually will overcome these issues, the wars, poverty, and all this unhappiness, and get into a happy and peaceful state. This peaceful state we will eventually learn to get into brings us into higher spiritual worlds that are beyond what we can imagine in terms of creativity, happiness, and living peacefully with each other. So this is in some way our favorite meal or state of living. But the favorite way of living gets old at some point. It gets saturated, as we will with our favorite food. But this time it happens at a much grander scale. But the principle is the same. It might be difficult to believe, but at some point we start to long for the contrast to this peaceful and happy state. We are not really happy anymore. We are not unhappy, but it doesn't bring us anything. So we'll start looking for something else. We will start looking for the contrast. This fulfillment of a peaceful world starts a process back towards the physical world, where we can make mistakes and get new experiences that can expand our abilities and consciousness, so we can return to the higher, peaceful spiritual worlds with a renewed longing for this state. So the idea here is that After we have lived until we get tired of these high spiritual worlds, we get the opportunity to get back to a state where we are not so happy, or where we get the contrast, where we don't have to live for each other, but we can live for ourselves. This will have some consequences that we'll experience that are not happy or not pleasant for us. And when we start experience these unhappy states, then we will get that knowledge that we can bring into the higher spiritual worlds, and we will live on these experiences for until they are not relevant anymore, and we will again go back into the physical world where we can get even more experiences and so forth. And this principle keeps repeating over and over again. And the big difference between the high spiritual worlds and the physical world is generally that we live for ourselves in the physical world, and we live to serve for others in the spiritual worlds. So this is the main mental contrast between the spiritual world and the physical world. So right now we have to learn how to live to serve others instead of live to serve ourselves. So the physical world meets our hunger in the beginning after we have lived for a long period of time in the spiritual world. But we will eventually get tired or saturated of this experience that it can bring us. We live for ourselves, but also face the consequences of living among other living beings with the same state of mind. Everyone tries to live at the expense of others. Wars, fights, and non-peaceful settings are unavoidable. But this process is necessary to gain the contrast to a peaceful life. We need a short period of time where we experience the contrast to serving each other. We need to gain the contrast and expand our consciousness to keep on living our eternal life. Without the expansion of consciousness, we cannot have an eternal life, because it would keep being the same. It would not fundamentally be renewed. An eternal life does not start at a certain point. It has always been and will always be. It will never end. If life has started at some point, it would have an age. It would not be eternal, so it does not make sense to talk about getting to a perfected life. That perfected life can only be something temporary, something that has started and eventually will end. This is because the perfect state is a creation. Everything that we experience is a creation, and so is the perfect life, and that also goes for the unperfect life. The living being is beyond or behind the created, and the living being needs to renew its consciousness, so it will keep going between a state where its hunger is to serve others and serving itself. It will alternate between these two states in order to keep renewing its consciousness. And in order to renew its consciousness, it needs to gain new contrasts. It might sound like some kind of prison that we as living being has to alternate between serving ourselves and others, but the living being is always going towards what is longing for or has a hunger for. To the living being, it's always going towards the light in some ways. Something it wants, something it desires, something that seems better because it has its hunger for it. As of now, we are tired of the consequences of serving ourselves. This has led to all the wars, the unhappiness, poverty, and you name it. We get to experience how it feels to be at the wrong end of that, and serving each other becomes the new light to us. But when we have had enough of serving others, then serving ourselves becomes the new light for us. We are in a very dark period of time right now, where we experience the ultimate consequences of serving ourselves in order to understand what is right and wrong. Each time we alternate between serving ourselves and serving each other, we put a layer to our talents. We expand our experience of life. Therefore, we don't go in a circle alternating between the light and dark, but it's a spiral that keeps expanding. So we don't experience the same thing over and over again, but we do experience based on the same eternal principles and structures in life. So let's get back to the question why we are not perfect if we have an eternal life. The answer is that in order to have an eternal life, that is life that never started and will never end, we need contrasts. These contrasts has to be created and renewed. There are periods in eternal life where we have to experience the dark nuances in order to keep experience the life nuances in new ways. We need to experience both the dark and light nuances of life to keep life fresh and interesting. Keep experience the same thing over and over again, it will eventually become kind of a nightmare. We get fed up with it, and it would be like eating our favorite food over and over and over again. And it will eventually get to the state where it's not our favorite food anymore. We would need some other things to eat, so to speak. So how can we know if this is not just some crazy theory? Martinus points towards nature and how it works. In our life, we experience contrast in day and night, winter and summer, and so forth. He states that we find evolution and the opposite, which he calls involution, everywhere in life. Involution is the process where we don't know who we are, what the mystery of life is, and so forth. We also know this state especially as the materialistic state, where we believe we are physical beings, which we are, but we are more than physical beings according to Martinus. But as a materialistic person, we believe, and the only way that we exist is due to our physical body. Martinus states that there is something behind our physical body, and we also have a spiritual part of us. But when we get into this materialistic state, we have sort of completed this involution. We'll get the results of it, and we will learn eventually that this perspective of life is not sufficient for us to occupy. Therefore, we will start this evolution or development that we already see in a lot of ways in our daily life. We have started to evolve with feelings and intelligence. We know much more. We have created science and so forth, and we have come a long, long way. But we still need to learn in order to live this new way. And it's like 180 degrees turnaround from living on our own devices or for ourselves to live for others. Evolution and involution is part of the big picture of what is going on here. It also shows us that in the big picture that the evolution is a good thing, and we kind of get that normally, that we are going towards a better place, but that we got here in the first place to this not so happy place is also a good thing for us. Not because it's pleasant or anything, it's really unpleasant. Wars and so forth, it's really bad. Unhappiness is by definition unpleasant, right? But it's a good thing for us in the way that it's an unpleasant good thing. That's what Martinus called it. That we can actually experience this to renew our consciousness. And obviously this is a completely different way of looking at things than we normally do, where we have this more linear way of thinking, where we have started somewhere. It's sometimes pretty unclear where, but we have started somewhere because we can see we are evolving right now. And at some point we have this idea that we will get to something perfect, or perfect life in a way. But the idea here is basically, yeah, we will get to this perfect life, but we will also at some point get saturated by that. We will get tired by it, and we will start to go back to where we are right now, and we will eventually end up where we are now again, but in a different and on a higher level than we are right now. It is in some ways a very simple argument and explanation, but it doesn't follow some of the normal perceptions of life, which can make it difficult to grasp. The idea is that there is no linear development in our life. Life has not started at some point and will not end up in a perfect situation and stay that way for an eternity. Life has to go on. The perfect state will get boring at some point, and we'll have to move on and learn new things. That requires the experience of new contrasts. That is why we are in the middle of experience all the darker side of life as we are right now. We don't really know what is going on, and we can make mistakes that gives us new experiences. These experiences are good for us in the sense that they will lead us to an even more perfected life situation. We will also get tired of that one at some point, and we'll get even more experiences when we return to sort of the darker side of life. This keeps on going forever. That is the message in this. I'll go into more details in the future about all this. Martinus has written more than 5,000 pages, made symbols, had lectures and so forth about this world picture. So a short video like this does not make up for all of that. But I hope I had conveyed the basic idea of why we are in the state that we are right now. A state where we are getting perfected and learning what is right and wrong. If you find this video valuable, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Both help the channel quite a lot. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks for watching. Thank you.